מי שלא אחר וברך אמונה יסבנדו ואותיו כדבר אדוני.
And let's get started. So this week's Parsha, we're back to, after Shavuot, the regular cycle of Parashat HaShavuah. I hope, by the way, everyone had a good holiday. Naso is famous for being the longest Parsha in the Torah. It follows the general theme of the beginning of Parashat Bamidbar. Naso, some people translate to carry. It can mean to lift, right? It is connected in many, many different contexts in this Parsha, including to that word Naso, including to the topic that we're going to talk about today. It's found in the priestly blessings. The last of the priestly blessing, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. It's really interesting that the name of the Parsha, which most people associate with the first verse, counting the Levitical tribes, is also one of the key verbs in the priestly blessing. What does it mean? Yisa Adonai panav elecha. It doesn't mean that God should count his face on you. It means he should raise you up. Yisa Adonai panav elecha. May God raise you up, or raise his countenance up towards you and give you peace. The priestly blessing is featured in this week's Parsha. It is a special blessing, 3 different parts to it, that the Kohanim recite in the temple in order to bless the people. If you come to synagogue, you're probably very familiar with the priestly blessing. We actually recite it every time the Amidah is repeated. The prayer leader recites the priestly blessing, but it's recited in the diaspora also from the Bima, where the Kohanim reenact the priestly benediction that was recited in the temple. They stand up on the pulpit and bless the people with these same words. They are fulfilling a commandment that is found in this week's Parsha, and let me read it with you. Little prayer that this works. Baruch atah Hazum. Okay, it worked. So you should see the page from Safaria on your screens now. I'm in Numbers chapter 6, verse 22, which begins, God spoke to Moses, Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, Daber el Aharon ve'el banav lemor ko tevarchu et bnei Yisrael amor lahem. Thus shall you bless the people of Israel. Notice that this commandment is directed at Aaron and his sons. God speaks to Moses, and Moses is to say this to Aaron and his sons. Bless the people with the following words. Here is the priestly blessing. Yavarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichuneka, and there again this word, Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Everyone knows these 3 verses, but this last verse is the one I want to spend some time on today. V'samu et shemi al bnei Yisrael va'ani avarechem. Thus they shall link my name with the people of Israel, and I will bless them. They shall link my name with the people of Israel, and I will bless them. So let me explain to you why I thought that we should study these verses. I was in shul over Shavuot, and we did the priestly blessing, and a young attendee at the service came up to me with a very good question, and I, on the spot, didn't have an answer. Thankfully, I grabbed Chazan Kavari, and he was able to help. The question was, Rabbi, why do the Kohanim cover their faces when they bless the people? Why do they not just bless the people with their faces uncovered? Kids have the best questions. And I was stumped until the Chazan reminded me. It is so that we don't get confused into thinking that the blessing is coming from the priests. If we saw their face, we might think that they were the ones blessing the people. But we are not supposed to think that. Now, why are we not supposed to think it? Why can't the priests be the blessing, be the sources of the blessing? Well, it's this last verse that we read that explains why. That explains why it's important not to be confused that the blessing is coming from the priests, why we need to be aware that the blessing is coming from God. V'samu et shemi al b'nei Yisrael. The goal is for you to link my name. Link me, God says. Va'ani avarechem. And I will bless them. Now, if you look at Rashi's explanation on the verse, I'm just going to open up Rashi here on the side, and you can see what Rashi says. They shall put my name upon the children of Israel. That means they shall bless them by the proper name of God. When the verse says V'samu et shemi, it means the priests in the temple didn't say Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. They actually pronounced God's name. That was a very important part of the blessing. Using God's name, which normally was forbidden to be uttered, but it was permitted when the priests were blessing the people. Rashi then says, what does it mean, Ani avarechem? I will bless them. Does it mean I will bless the people? Or does it mean I will bless the priests who are blessing the people? So actually, Rashi quotes both explanations. He says, I will bless the Israelites. I will give my approval to the priest's blessing. Right? Ani avarechem means I will follow through with the words that the priests have uttered, or I will bless the priests. I'll bless the priests so that the power of their words maybe becomes enacted. Now, in Rashi's explanation, I want you to understand the tension here. What is it that Rashi's commenting on? That we always ask, what is Rashi's question? The verse says, Ani avarechem. I will bless them. It's God saying, I will bless them. Who is them? If God blesses the priests, it means that the priests are the ones who are blessing the people. They're not the conduit. They're the actual source of the blessing. And because they are of elevated status, their blessing is more meaningful than if they were just regular Israelites. But if I will bless them, Ani avarchem means I will bless not the priests, but the people. Well, that is in accordance to the way I answered that kid's question yesterday. Why are the priests' face covered? Because they don't matter. They're not of elevated status. They're not more special than anybody else. They are just the conduits by which God blesses the people. Ultimately, God is the source of that blessing. So you can see there's a way that Jewish tradition prefers to understand the verse. Not that God is blessing the priests, but Rashi's first explanation, that God is blessing the people, and the priests just manifest that blessing by saying particular words, and God says, amen to those words. God agrees with those words and makes the blessing happen. Now, this is a fascinating thing, the priestly blessing, and I'm not sure we've had the chance, or you've had the chance ever, to study some of the rules when it comes to priests and their ability to bless the people. You see, in modern Jewish practice, we are used to honor going to people who are particularly pious, people who are particularly knowledgeable, but there's an aversion in Judaism to honoring people simply because of their lineage. Why should anybody be treated differently just because they come from the right family? And yet there are many different ways that Kohanim are honored in the service for just that reason. They come from the right family. They're given the first honor of the Torah reading. When Birkat HaMazon is recited, they're the ones who are invited to bless the meal. And, maybe in the most blatant way possible, for this very important ritual, the blessing of the people, we bring them forward. Now, what if there's something wrong with these priests? What if we don't like these priests? What if these priests are not good people? What if they're idolaters? What if they're transgressors? So all of this comes up in Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, and he explains that there are some aspects or attributes of a Kohen that would disqualify him, but there are some that don't. And this is what I want to submit to you today as food for thought, something that's quite interesting. Let me share with you on my screen now Maimonides and his laws of the priestly blessing. We're just going to do it in English, make it easy. This is what Maimonides writes. There are 6 factors that prevent a priest from reciting the priestly blessings. 6 factors. Number 1, an inability to pronounce the blessings properly. Number 2, physical deformities. Number 3, transgressions. Number 4, a lack of maturity. Number 5, intoxication. And number 6, the ritual impurity of the priest's hands. Now, some of these, I'm assuming, sit better with you than others. Some make sense. Would it make sense for a priest who's drunk to be up there blessing the people, serving as the conduit for God's blessings, if the person's not aware, right? And you could say the same thing for someone who lacks maturity. If he doesn't know what he's doing, he's making a joke out of it, that might disqualify him. That makes sense. But what about transgressions? Well, who doesn't have transgressions? You're telling me find a priest who is without sin? And what about physical deformities? Why would somebody who's physically deformed, perhaps by no fault of his own, why would he be disqualified from serving as that conduit for God's blessings? So I want to address those 2 specifically. Number 1, why is it that someone who has a physical deformity is not allowed to recite the priestly blessing? And number 2, why is somebody who has transgressions forbidden? We have to read forward in Maimonides to understand. Physical deformities. Are you with me? I'm on the second halacha in chapter 15, the laws of the priestly blessings. What is implied? A priest should not recite the priestly blessing if he has blemishes on his face, hands, or feet. For example, his fingers are bent over, crooked, or covered with white spots, for they will attract the people's attention. Aha! Maimonides gives us a bit of a hint on the question of why a priest with physical deformities is not allowed to be the Kohen. They will attract the people's attention. So this goes back again to the answer that I gave the young boy who asked me about why the priest's face is covered. So we're not concerned with who the person is, because the blessing doesn't come from the Kohen, the person. It comes from God. And if somebody has a physical deformity, then my attention, because it's unusual, right, will be focused instead of receiving the blessing. Instead, I'm focused on, look at this guy. He looks weird. He looks strange. So what likely happened through time is originally you could see the face of the person in the original priestly blessing. You could see the face of the person who was reciting the priestly blessing. And now, one of the reasons why we cover a person's face is for extra emphasis on this principle in the Mishnah Torah. Do not attract people's attention. Everybody, all the priests should look the same. If someone stands out from the crowd, the people will be unable to focus. And Maimonides continues here. A person whose spittle always dribbles when he speaks. A person who is blind in one eye should not recite the priestly blessings. However, if such a person was well known in his city and everyone was familiar with the person who was blind in one eye or whose spittle dribbled, he may recite the priestly blessing, for he will not attract their attention. Maimonides just repeats this same principle over and over again. It's not about the priest. Anything that will draw your attention to him, the person, can disqualify him. Now this is important because some people say, well, we're a religion that preaches love and acceptance and treating people who are physically deformed in the same way as somebody who is not. How can we have these rules that somebody who's physically deformed is different than the crowd? So I read a fantastic discussion on this very question. And the conclusion of the author of this article was, Maimonides says it's a physical deformity that disqualifies the priest because that deformity attracts people's attention. If we could build a society where people's physical appearance would not attract someone's attention, that is, if people could be more accepting and loving and not focused on how this person is strange or stands out from the crowd, then maybe Maimonides would say, you know what, we will allow physical deformities. And doesn't he come very close in the passage we just read? You're not allowed to have a person recite the blessing with one eye, except if you know him. If it's one-eyed Pete, and everyone knows one-eyed Pete, the Kohen, and everyone likes him, and we're used to seeing him all over the place, well, then he's allowed. So I think Maimonides has an important lesson here about physical deformities in people, right? And other kinds of handicaps. That a priest, ideally, right, should be allowed to recite the priestly blessing, even though he is handicapped. No problem at all. The problem isn't with the priests, it's with us. If only we could learn to be more accepting, to not have people's differences attract our attention. You know, what's wrong with that guy? Distract us from the way we should be feeling. If only we were in that space, we could enable all Kohanim to recite the blessing. So I think that's the first thing I want to say about Maimonides' lesson. I think he's teaching us something very, very profound. Why is the face of the Kohen covered? What I answered to the boy who asked the question, so you don't think it's coming from him, is only part of the answer. A deeper part of the answer, and I hadn't studied this until today, so I hope he'll forgive me, but a deeper part of the question is equality, so that everyone looks the same. When you have a talit, a white talit in front of your face, you don't see the difference between this guy and that guy and that guy, and that is the ideal. That is the ideal. Now, I know you're going to say, well, what about women who should also come up? You're right. Okay, I accept that Maimonides doesn't go that far. But sometimes the way Jewish sources work is they point us in the right direction, even though they may not take us there completely. I think Maimonides is certainly doing that, so that you don't think that the blessing is coming from the priest himself, and so that all look the same. Someone who may have a deformity under that talit, you would never know it. It's interesting when you talk to people about wearing the mask, as we did during the pandemic. There are some people who liked wearing the mask. There was something comfortable about having your face covered. Maybe people didn't see exactly who you were. Maybe you could hide some part of yourself. Maybe there's a little bit of safety and security, not from a virus, but guarding yourself when you have a mask on, so that people aren't paying attention to you as much. They don't know that it's you. I think it's the same thing here. A symbol of your not being there, and just this equal wall of white among all the priests is what Maimonides is referring to. Now, what about this transgressions thing? That's a tough one. How could you find someone who is free of transgressions? And I mean, you've been to my shul. Some of you have been to my shul. Am I interviewing the Kohanim before they go up, asking them what they had for breakfast, asking them whether they drove to shul or not? What transgressions are we talking about? Let's read what Maimonides has to say about that. Transgressions. What is implied? A priest who kills someone should never recite the priestly blessing, even if he repents, as implied by Isaiah, which states, "Your hands are full of blood," and states, "When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you." A priest who served false gods, even if he was compelled to do so or did so inadvertently, though he has repented, may never recite the priestly blessing, as can be inferred from 2 Kings 23:9, which states, "However, the priests of the high places shall not ascend to God's altar in Jerusalem." The recitation of the priestly blessings is equated to service in the temple, as Deuteronomy states, to serve him and to bless his name. Similarly, a priest who converted to the worship of false gods, even though he repents, may never recite the priestly blessing. But here's the key words. Ushar averot ein monim. Other transgressions do not prevent a priest from blessing the people. You know that in the Torah we have 613 commandments. And Maimonides here only mentions 2. The 2 that would disqualify a priest. They are murder, if a priest murdered somebody, even if he repented, that means it was a mistake. He did everything he had to do to repent. He can never pronounce the priestly blessing again. And number 2, worshiping idolatry, worshiping a false god. Even if he repented, he can never say the priestly blessing again. So think about this. The priest is a thief. The priest is an adulterer. The priest is someone who takes God's name in vain. The priest is somebody who disrespects his parents. The priest is somebody who violates Shabbat. The priest is somebody who doesn't keep kosher. There's a whole bunch of different sins that a priest could be guilty for. And Maimonides says, until he murders somebody or really worships in the temple of a foreign god, you are not to disqualify him for the priesthood. What is going on here? Why do you think Maimonides, who's usually very strict, says there's only two sins that you should care about, and the rest, leave them alone? So part of it could be that we don't want to embarrass people and start questioning them. Doug says in the comments, there would be no priests. That's good. Right. Everybody has transgressions. But I would respond, Doug, and say, okay, so Maimonides could have listed another maybe 10 very serious sins. He only lists 2. And these are the 2 that sort of make the most sense. Why? Because the priests bless the people with their hands. So when hands have blood on them, how can they be used to bless people? And there's a certain blood that comes from murder that you can never really wash off. And when you worship an idol, when you serve in a holy temple, you sort of bow with your hands, and it would be too much to have those very hands bless the people. On the other hand, I'm thinking to myself, well, but your hands also can steal from other people, and those are the hands that are blessing you. I think that what this really is showing, it's more that last line that matters about making sure that there is equality between all of the priests. If we start lining them up, not only according to who looks the best and who doesn't, who's deformed and who's not deformed, but according to who's got more sins than the next guy, all you will have is fighting and embarrassment and public shaming of people, everything that the priestly blessing was designed to avoid. The priestly blessing has an element of it that I forgot to tell that kid. And that's really the message I wanted to share with you all today. The element of equality, of treating everybody the same. When the priest says, Yevarechecha Hashem ve'yishmerecha, he speaks with one voice to everybody. May God bless all of you. If such a blessing was only recited by people who were perfect, maybe the person receiving the blessing would say to themselves, look, this doesn't mean anything to me, because the person who's reciting the blessing doesn't know what it's like to live in flesh and blood and to have passions and to make mistakes. The person reciting this blessing is somebody who's pure, who's never dealt with challenges in life, never made a mistake. What good is a blessing coming from them? I think there's something very special about assigning this blessing to the priests that never could have been accomplished by assigning it to the rabbis or to the righteous or to the most observant among the people. If it was only given to the upper elites of Jewish intellectuals and the most observant, the blessing would not be as complete. Instead, we take this subsection of the Jewish people, priests, and we say, everybody, all of you priests, we don't care that you had McDonald's this morning. We don't care that you did all kind of bad stuff on Shabbat. In fact, the fact that you are imperfect makes your blessing more complete. We're only going to tell the most extreme of you not to sin, the murderers and the idolaters, because that would be a problem. But everybody else, we want your imperfections to be part of this blessing, because a blessing that comes from Kohanim who know what it is to live in the real world, who know what it is to face challenges and sometimes not be able to overcome them. A blessing that comes from people who don't look down on the community, but see everybody else as the same, everybody as sinners, everybody as imperfect. The Kohanim are not meant to be the elites. They are meant to just be a representative group, a select representative group, but part of the people. Because God really doesn't care who your ancestors are. He's using this priestly title to assign a special role, but not because the people who are assigned that role really deserve it. It's just because the math adds up. An imperfect people delivering a perfect blessing to the rest of the imperfect people. Why do the priests cover their faces? Because we may all look different, you and I, with deformities and sins and challenges, but beneath the talit, we're all the same. And when God says, I will bless, you put my name on all the people, and thus I will bless them. He's speaking to not the priests, not Rashi's second explanation. I'm convinced that's not true, but to everybody. I will bless the priests and the people. Let me repeat that because I think I said it the wrong way. It's not that Rashi's explanations were one was right and one was wrong. It's that they're both correct. Are you with me? Va'ani avarechem. I will bless them. I will bless the priests and I will bless the people. Right? All as one. And that's what manifests during the priestly blessing. They're just there, the priests, to give us the message of equality that I think is inherent in this blessing. By the way, one little thought. I know we're out of time. Before the priests bless the people, there is a bracha that they have to say. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'kedushato shel Aharon v'tzivanu levarech et amo Yisrael be'ahava. When you light candles, do you say lahadlik ner shel Shabbat be'ahava? There is no other blessing that I can think of right now that requires the reciter to be reciting the blessing with a feeling. You can recite the blessing over the candles or over the challah, no matter which way you feel. But when they're blessing the people, they have to recite it lovingly. And I think it all relates back to this matter. If I'm looking down on everybody, I'm not reciting the blessing with love. But if I can see the pain in the people whom I'm blessing and relate to it because I too have pains in my life, then I believe that is truly a blessing recited with love. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for the rehashing it at the end, but I hope you get my point now. See you next Monday. Take care.